I recently watched a man sign the final closing papers on a 3-bedroom suburban home. He sat there in a crisp, ironed button-down, casually chatting with the real estate agent about the best local spots for Saturday brunch. To the bank and the title company, he was Robert, a model citizen with a 750 credit score, a decade of tax returns, and a steady career in mid-level management. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to hide. When it came time to verify his ID, he pulled out a driver's license that looked indistinguishable from any other. It had the correct holographic overlays and a magnetic strip that swiped through the system without a single hiccup. It was a masterpiece of identity stabilization. To the people in that room, he was a success story of the American dream. But there was a silent, jarring contradiction beneath the surface. While this Robert was discussing property taxes, the Social Security number he was using actually belonged to a man who had passed away in a rural town 3 states over nearly 20 years ago. The system didn't flag it. The databases didn't talk to each other. Even his employer, who had recently given him a glowing performance review, had intentionally looked the other way when his initial paperwork showed a minor clerical discrepancy years prior. That moment, the firm handshake, the exchange of house keys, the smiles, felt completely normal. Yet it was built entirely on a shadow infrastructure of high-quality forgeries and institutional complicity. It wasn't just a lucky break. It was a calculated navigation of a fractured system. It makes you wonder, in a country obsessed with security and documentation, how does someone manage to live a perfectly legal life in total invisibility? The answer isn't found in the shadows, but in the very systems designed to keep them out. Systems that are often too disconnected or too incentivized by profit to actually see who is standing right in front of them.
It's really a wild contradiction to witness in real time, because you look at that closing table, right, and every single institutional safeguard is technically there.
Yeah, but completely bypassed.
Exactly. Completely bypassed. And for today's deep dive, that's our main objective. We're going to do a systemic analysis of the exact mechanisms that facilitate this kind of, long-term undetected residence here in the U.S.
Right, because we can't just look at this as a bunch of isolated criminal acts.
No, it's a massive self-sustaining ecosystem. We really need to unpack 3 specific pillars here. First is the technological arms race of identity verification. Second is the structural fragmentation of government databases.
The silos.
The silos, yeah. And third, maybe most importantly, the economic incentives that deeply embed undocumented workers into the societal fabric.
Because it's where those technological vulnerabilities and human complicity just intersect perfectly.
To maintain this parallel shadow economy.
Right. And to really grasp how this ecosystem functions, for you listening, you have to look at the physical reality of it, the actual identity stabilization.
The physical forgery.
Yes. Let's talk about Mateo. Mateo's story in the sources is it's fascinating. He lives in this really cramped apartment in Queens, New York, and the most dominant sound in his living room is just this mechanical hum of a high-end inkjet printer.
A printer that costs more than his car, I should add.
Way more. And for 15 years, Mateo has essentially occupied the identity of a man who died in a motorcycle accident in rural Ohio back in 1984.
Wow, 15 years.
Yeah, and he doesn't just have a fake card. He possesses a comprehensive history.
Right, a fully fleshed out life on paper.
Exactly. But his entire world right now is dominated by this terrifying transition to the real ID requirements.
Yeah, the real ID, that's a massive stressor for this community.
Huge. The sources describe him spending his nights just sitting under this harsh desk lamp, staring at these microscopic imperfections on a holographic overlay. An overlay he bought for $3,000, by the way.
$3,000, just for the plastic film.
Yeah. And every single time he passes a TSA checkpoint, he feels this profound, nauseating shame. He's mastered this legacy identity, but he's terrified that one single biometric firmware update at the local DMV is going to destroy everything.
Because the digital side catches up to the analog deception.
Exactly. And his whole life, 20 decades of building, just evaporates. It's not just a concept. It's, the physical tremor in his hands when he hands over a piece of plastic that looks more real than his own face.
That physical tremor is the human cost of this constant escalation. The arms race between document forgery techniques and the detection systems.
Because the forgery is winning. Right?
Yes. The sophistication of these synthetic identities and the really high-quality forgeries, they frequently outpace the deployment of verification tech.
Wait, explain synthetic identity fraud for a second. Because it's not traditional identity theft, right?
No. Traditional identity theft is taking over a real person's life entirely. Synthetic identity fraud is when a persona is constructed from a mixture of real and fabricated information.
Like a Frankenstein identity.
You're creating a digital ghost. And it is alarmingly simple when you understand the mechanics of it.
Like the Richard Macias profile from the research.
Oh, Richard Macias is the perfect example.
Let me just list this out for you because it blew my mind. Richard Macias is a fully fabricated 65-year-old from New Jersey. He has a specific address on Prospect Street in Marlton.
Real address, fake guy.
Right. He has a recorded height of 5'7", weighs 237 pounds, works as a radar controller. He's got a mother with the maiden name Walters, email address, phone number, social security number, and a Visa card expiring in 2028.
All perfectly logged in the system.
An AI program generated a highly realistic photo of him smiling outside a Six Flags theme park. And then another AI added a troop of fabricated grandkids to his social profile, just to make him look deeply rooted in the community.
And how long did that take to build?
Minutes. Assembled in minutes using publicly available databases and dark web services.
And that supply chain, the dark web services, it's a massive industrial complex now.
How cheap are we talking?
You can access dark web marketplaces that sell illegally obtained social security numbers for as little as $4.
$4? That's less than a cup of coffee.
Yeah. And on the physical side, you've got dealers in Los Angeles selling high-quality physical IDs and green card packages for anywhere between $80 to $200.
But the sourcing of those real numbers is really dark, right?
Children and recently deceased individuals are the prime targets.
Because their credit isn't being watched.
Actually, a child isn't going to check their credit report until they're 18. That gives a synthetic identity years to mature. They can build a robust, entirely fraudulent financial history over a decade. This dynamic has created an arms race where the cost of synthetic identity fraud in the financial industry has grown from about $8 billion in 2020 to more than $30 billion today.
$30 billion?
Yeah. The FTC estimates that synthetic identity fraud now accounts for 80 to 85% of all identity fraud cases.
Okay, so we really have to look at the financial paradox of this stabilization.
Yeah.
Because how we got here historically is, well, it's an unintended consequence.
You're talking about the 1986 Immigration Reform and Control Act, IRCA.
Okay. By making it explicitly unlawful for employers to hire undocumented workers and requiring the I-9 form for verification, IRCA inadvertently birthed this massive black market for legal documents.
It completely shifted the landscape.
False documents went from being a convenience to an absolute necessity if you wanted to work.
And you can literally see the direct result of that legislation in the Social Security Administration's ledgers, specifically the Earnings Suspense File, or the ESF.
Yeah. Explain how this works, because the scale is just hard to comprehend.
So the ESF acts as an accounting ledger. When an employer files a W-2 form, but the name and the Social Security number on that form do not match official records, the government can't credit those tax payments to a specific person's retirement account.
Because the person technically doesn't exist, or the name doesn't match the number.
Right. So instead, the money goes into the general trust funds, and the uncredited earnings record goes into this massive ESF file.
And after 1986, this file just exploded, right?
Exploded is an understatement. In the 1980s, uncredited earnings rose to $77.3 billion.
Okay.
Then they doubled in the 1990s to $188.9 billion.
Okay.
Over the next 2 decades, that figure grew by a factor of 10. By 2021, the accumulated total was $1.9 trillion.
Trillion, with a T.
With a T. Between 2012 and 2016 alone, the file surged by $409 billion. The SSA routes up to 1.8% of all total wages received from employers each year directly into the suspense file.
So when you break down what that means for the federal budget, we're talking about $22 billion in annual tax receipts collected from undocumented workers.
Yes.
And the bulk of that goes straight into Social Security, about $12.6 billion.
Okay.
And Medicare gets another $5.9 billion.
Programs they can never legally claim.
Exactly. That's my point. It's like, okay, think about it like building a massive skyscraper, but the entire concrete foundation is built on uncredited, off-the-books materials. If the federal government is collecting billions of dollars to prop up Medicare and Social Security from people who can never use those services, doesn't this system actively rely on the very fraud it officially condemns?
The government is structurally dependent on the continuous financial input generated by identity stabilization.
It's totally paradoxical.
The duality of this mechanism is the defining characteristic of the whole system. Identity stabilization is the necessary input for systemic integration.
Because it absorbs the money without taking on the liability of paying out benefits.
The system seamlessly absorbs the financial benefits, stabilizing these major entitlement programs that would otherwise face severe shortfalls. Meanwhile, the workers themselves absorb all the constant existential risk of biometric or digital detection.
Like Mateo shivering at the TSA line while his taxes fund the roads.
Exactly. The risk is localized entirely on the individual holding the forged document. The financial reward is distributed broadly across the federal infrastructure,
which creates a population that is fiscally integrated into the American economy, but legally completely invisible. But, producing a high-quality physical forgery or buying a clean number on the dark web, that's only step one.
It has to survive the digital world.
Exactly. Once someone like Mateo has the documents, they have to survive contact with the digital infrastructure of the state. Fooling an HR manager is one thing, but surviving a background check. That brings us to the structural blind spots of the American bureaucracy.
The data silos.
Yes. Because the lack of real-time data interoperability, the fact that federal, state, and private sector databases don't cross-reference each other, it's a fundamental design flaw.
A flaw that perpetuates all these enforcement vulnerabilities.
Let's look at Elena. Elena's story really grounds this. She exists in this state of suspended animation in the American Southwest.
Living in the gaps.
Totally in the gaps. Her state-issued driver's license is perfectly valid. Why? Because her state does not share its full DMV role with federal immigration authorities.
But her federal tax ID is flagged in a completely separate system.
Exactly, a non-communicating system. So she survives because she lives between the gears of the bureaucracy. It's this calculated fragmentation of her identity.
How does she earn a living?
She operates a small, highly successful landscaping business. It's registered under a doing business as name, a DBA, in a county database.
And the county database never shakes hands with the Social Security Administration's no-match list.
She's isolated her legal exposure just by understanding exactly where the digital borders end. But the mental friction of this daily life, she has to maintain a constant, highly detailed mental map of which municipal office talks to which federal agency. Terrifying. She relies heavily on just the sheer volume of paperwork and hoping overworked clerks won't cross-reference birth dates between different forms.
But there's always the risk of a glitch. A system update.
Yeah, the glitch is her ultimate vulnerability. There's this moment in the sources where she describes standing in a bank lobby. Pure, cold terror. The teller just asked to, quote, update her profile.
Wow, a totally routine request for anyone else.
Right, but for her it felt like a death sentence. Answering the teller's questions threatened to bridge the two digital islands she had spent 10 years carefully keeping apart.
To understand how someone like Elena survives in these specific gaps, you really have to look at the architecture of bordering circuitry.
Bordering circuitry, that's what scholars call it.
Yeah, bordering circuitry and the policing archipelago. The border isn't just a physical boundary in the desert anymore. It's a geographic configuration of information exchange.
So the border is everywhere data is collected.
Actually, yes. Digital surveillance systems act as both externalization and internalization mechanisms. Externalization means the surveillance stretches the border outward, away from the nation-state boundaries. It aims to meet migrants and assess risk profiles long before they reach physical ports of entry.
Like tracking them internationally.
Right. And internalization refers to the expansion of border controls directly into the territorial center of the country, turning local police traffic stops or workplace audits into extensions of immigration enforcement.
And this is driven by the Department of Homeland Security, right?
Yes. The central engine is the Enforcement Integrated Database, or the EID.
The EID.
It's a massive shared repository. It maintains information on federal investigations, arrests, bookings, detentions, removals. The volume of biographic information in the EID is staggering.
Like names, aliases, dates of birth.
Telephone numbers, addresses, nationality, alien registration numbers, social security numbers, employment history, even highly specific physical characteristics like scars and tattoos. And it processes biometrics too, fingerprints, DNA, photographs.
That is a massive surveillance regime. So how does that feed into local law enforcement?
It feeds directly into distribution programs. For example, LENNS, the Law Enforcement Notification System.
LENNS.
LENNS lets the U.S. government disclose information on criminal aliens to domestic law enforcement. If a non-citizen who meets certain criteria is released into U.S. territory, LENNS automatically pulls info from federal databases and sends it to the specific local agency where they're released.
And the state where they plan to live.
Exactly. Then there's CHIS, the Criminal History Information Sharing Program. That operates internationally.
Sharing with other countries.
The U.S. shares biometric and biographic info with Mexico and select Central American and Caribbean countries. They're effectively exporting criminal history info to track movement across multiple borders.
But here is the crazy part. Despite all of this interconnected surveillance infrastructure, the system routinely fails to catch people like Elena.
Right. And scholars John Palfrey and Urs Gasser categorize this failure into 4 distinct layers of interoperability failure.
Let's go through these. Technological, data, human, and institutional.
Start with technological. Government databases are notoriously stovepiped. They're built on ancient legacy systems inherited from disbanded agencies. They simply cannot physically connect or seamlessly transfer data.
Right. They don't have the interfaces. And data interoperability.
That's the capability of the systems to actually make sense of the exchange data once they are connected. If one system reads dates as day, month, year, and the other reads month, day, year, the databases just throw an error. They can't communicate.
But the more critical failures are the human and institutional layers. Right? This is where the deliberate refusal to share information happens.
Yes. Human interoperability refers to the will and ability of the actual individuals within these agencies to work together. And institutional interoperability requires that the institutions housing the data have compatible mandates.
And they often don't.
They absolutely don't. Federal law severely limits the Social Security Administration and the IRS from sharing tax form info with the Department of Homeland Security.
Because of privacy grounds for tax returns?
Exactly. Plus, civil liberties organizations like the ACLU actively oppose any coordination between the SSA and immigration authorities. They view it as an assault on constitutional rights.
This tension is perfectly illustrated by the whole political ping-pong of the SSA's no-match letters.
Oh, the no-match letters are a perfect case study.
Right. So for you listening, a no-match letter is a notification sent directly to an employer telling them that an employee's Social Security number on their W-2 does not match official government records.
And the policy on these letters swings wildly depending on who is in the White House.
Under the Bush administration, ICE proposed a strict rule penalizing employers who ignored these letters. They were trying to weaponize the data mismatch.
But then the Obama administration halted the letters entirely.
Specifically to facilitate deferred action for childhood arrivals or DACA applications, they deliberately wanted to avoid a situation where DACA applicants would have to admit to perjury regarding the use of fake numbers on previous job forms.
And then the Trump administration reversed course again.
They resumed the practice, sent out 1.6 million notices across 2019 and 2020 to crack down on unauthorized labor.
And then the Biden administration discontinued them again?
It's just back and forth, back and forth. And the IRS historically disavows any responsibility for dealing with illegal alien identity theft too, right?
Their mandate is revenue collection, not border enforcement. In 2016, the IRS commissioner explicitly said that Social Security and immigration authorities enforce that part of the law.
Because if the IRS started acting like ICE, nobody would file taxes.
Exactly. It would heavily discourage people from paying what they owe. The IRS Internal Revenue Manual actually refers to those engaged in employment-related identity fraud simply as borrowers.
Borrowers?
That's so wild.
They defend it as neutral and non-accusatory. A 2020 Government Accountability Office report even found that the IRS was actively choosing not to track numerous forms of employment-related identity fraud.
Look at this. If a private bank can instantly verify your credit score, pull your employment history, and cross-reference your identity across 3 private bureaus in 5 seconds to approve a mortgage.
5 seconds?
Yeah. Then the government's inability to match a Social Security number to a state DMV record is clearly a feature, not a bug.
It's an intentional architecture.
Exactly. If the tech exists to instantly approve a massive financial transaction, then the data silos protecting people like Elena are intentionally maintained. It really makes you wonder, is this supposed incompetence actually a formalized structural tolerance?
It absolutely is a structural tolerance. It's a direct result of decentralized federalism and those competing institutional mandates we talked about.
Because the IRS prioritizes maximum tax collection over immigration enforcement.
Because that is their legislative directive. And states protect their local economies by limiting data sharing with federal agencies, creating sanctuary policies to keep their labor force intact.
These competing mandates create the exact structural voids that allow fraudulent identities to persist long-term.
Right. Information system development across the government has proceeded with ad hoc interoperability rather than in a strategically pre-planned manner.
It's just a patchwork of legacy systems.
Which requires system users to manually access and search multiple disconnected databases just to triangulate basic data on a single target.
But, even when the databases completely fail to connect, a human being must ultimately look at the documents across a desk and make a hiring decision.
The physical workplace.
Yeah, we have to bring the focus from the digital realm back to the real world, because this is where economic incentives consistently override legal compliance.
The willful blindness of American employers.
Exactly. The severe labor market demands within specific U.S. industries really drive this institutional complicity. This is the mechanism embedding undocumented workers deeply into the societal fabric.
You see this exact handshake between necessity and silence with Miller.
Oh, Miller, the shift manager from the sources.
Right, at the massive poultry processing plant in the industrial Midwest.
Tell his story, because it perfectly captures this tension.
So Miller operates under a production quota that never shrinks, regardless of what the local labor pool looks like. He sits in this fluorescent-lit, wood-paneled office overlooking the processing floor, staring at an I-9 form for a new hire.
And the physical forgery resting on his desk is just obvious.
Obvious if you know what to look for. It's a Social Security card where the blue ink is just a shade too bright, and the cardstock paper is a fraction too thick.
But it passes the basic visual check.
It passes, and the weight of the severe labor shortage presses on Miller's chest like a physical pressure. He is forced, by the sheer necessity of keeping the production line moving, to choose to see the document, not the person or the obvious fraud.
The vulnerability in that office is entirely shared. Miller knows that auditing his processing floor too strictly will severely reduce his workforce.
Which kills the plant's output.
And consequently devastates the surrounding town's economy. So he's caught in this quiet, grinding contradiction.
Right, he considers himself a strict law and order man.
Yet he signs paychecks every Friday for a ghost workforce that, according to federal databases, technically does not exist.
The shadow economy is the grease on the gloves of those keeping American grocery store shelves full.
And the economics of this illegal employment are driven by strict, unyielding laws of supply and demand.
We're talking about approximately 8 million undocumented individuals currently active in the U.S. workforce.
8 million. And they aren't evenly distributed, right?
No, they are heavily concentrated in foundational sectors: agriculture, meatpacking, construction, and hospitality.
Foundational industries.
In agriculture, undocumented workers constitute over a quarter of the total employees. In construction, they make up about 14%.
And the sources mention something about the inelasticity of this labor supply.
Yeah, the labor supply of undocumented men and women is significantly less responsive to wage changes than that of legal immigrants or domestic workers.
Meaning they'll keep working regardless of conditions or pay cuts.
Exactly. This inelasticity makes them a highly reliable and economically advantageous workforce for employers who are hyper-focused on maximizing productivity and profit margins in these grueling industries.
Which brings us to the legal side of this, the concept of constructive knowledge versus actual knowledge.
Key. Enforcement agencies don't need to prove an employer explicitly knew a document was fake.
They just have to prove they should have known.
Right. Based on the totality of circumstances, if they should have known unauthorized workers were being used, they can be pursued.
And that overlaps deeply with willful blindness, where an employer deliberately avoids asking questions or ignores glaring warning signs specifically to maintain plausible deniability.
Companies frequently use complex corporate structuring to hide this. Sub-labor crews, temporary staffing agencies, and 1099 independent contractor classifications as legal insulation.
Like in the roofing industry, right?
Exactly. Regulators are trained to look past those contractual labels and focus on functional realities.
Like who actually controls the scheduling?
Who directs the daily work, who supplies the tools, and who holds the ultimate authority to remove workers from a job site.
So what are the warning signs of this constructive knowledge?
Patterns like relying on subcontractors that exist solely to supply labor without providing equipment, or inconsistent or missing business documentation from staffing agencies.
Or crews that frequently rotate names on payroll but remain operationally identical on the floor.
or continuing to use a specific labor source after receiving official warnings. A persistent misconception in the business community is that classifying workers as 1099 independent contractors entirely eliminates immigration risk.
But it doesn't.
It absolutely does not. Immigration enforcement assesses how the work is actually performed on the ground. A contractor can still face severe liability if the facts demonstrate a reliance on unauthorized labor through heavily insulated sub-labor crews.
But, okay, despite all these rules, the reality of how this law is enforced shows this stark, almost unbelievable asymmetry in prosecutions.
Under Title 8 of the U.S. Code, Section 1324A, employing an undocumented worker is a federal misdemeanor.
And the statute strictly mandates that employers must comply with a federal employment verification system, right? Attesting under penalty of perjury that they verified the person is not an unauthorized alien.
Yes, but prosecutions of the employers actually signing those forms are exceedingly rare.
The data highlighting this disparity is profound. Yes. During a recent 6-year period, there were over 340,000 federal prosecutions for illegal entry and 120,000 prosecutions for illegal reentry.
So nearly 500,000 prosecutions of the individual.
Exactly. But in that exact same time frame, out of hundreds of thousands of border arrests, there were only 107 total prosecutions of employers for illegal hiring under Section 1324A.
107 out of hundreds of thousands of interactions.
And to highlight how skewed this is, look at the Western District of Michigan. They accounted for almost half of those 107 prosecutions.
And did they target the employers?
None of the cases targeted the actual employers or business owners. The federal prosecutors used Section 1324A to charge the undocumented individuals themselves with illegally using a Social Security number or making a false claim of American citizenship.
Completely bypassing the employers who hired them.
Completely. And the rare high-profile exceptions where companies actually do get targeted, they only prove the rule.
Like the Asplundh Tree Experts case.
Exactly. This involved a massive company illegally employing over 100 undocumented workers to clear brush from gas and power lines across the country.
And they got hit hard financially, right?
Yeah, a record $80 million criminal forfeiture and a $15 million civil penalty. But look at the human consequences. 3 low-level employees were charged with visa fraud.
And the executives.
A vice president who actively encouraged rehiring dismissed employees under false names received 5 years of probation and a fine. 0 jail time.
Wow. 0 jail time for the VP coordinating it.
None. Another glaring example is the Southeastern Provision Slaughterhouse raid in Tennessee.
That was a massive tactical operation, almost 100 worker arrests.
Right, and the owner eventually pled guilty to federal tax evasion, wire fraud, and employment of undocumented workers.
And how long was the fraud going on?
He failed to pay $2.5 million in payroll taxes by systematically paying his undocumented workers in cash for 20 years.
20 years of a criminal enterprise.
And he received a sentence of just 18 months in prison and a fine of $1.5 million.
These cases demonstrate a very clear pattern. Even when massive corporations are prosecuted, the owners or upper management typically pay financial penalties as a cost of doing business instead of serving significant jail time.
It operates exactly like a highly regulated toll road. The authorities relentlessly arrest the delivery drivers for lacking the proper permits, but they utterly refuse to penalize the massive factories at the end of the road that are actively paying those exact drivers to make the delivery.
That's the exact dynamic.
If stopping the availability of jobs is the most effective way to stop the flow of undocumented workers, why is the employer the most heavily protected entity in the entire supply chain?
Because that systemic adaptation reveals the ultimate tension between economic realities and regulatory frameworks. Institutional complicity isn't a flaw. It's necessary for the economy to function in its current state.
It relies on it.
Heavily. Enforcing the law strictly and uniformly against employers would immediately devastate key sectors of the American economy.
The system relies entirely on this exploitative equilibrium to suppress wages, maintain high production quotas, and ensure the continuous, uninterrupted flow of labor in grueling industries that domestic workers largely avoid. So the long-term undetected residence of undocumented individuals in this country, it isn't a failure of the system.
Not it.
It's the direct result of the system functioning exactly as its contradictory pressures dictate.
Perfectly stated.
The foundation of this entire ecosystem relies on the constant arms race of identity stabilization through high-quality forgery.
And that physical deception is then completely protected by the structural voids of database non-interoperability within federal and state data silos.
And ultimately, the entire structure is sustained by the brutal economic necessity of institutional complicity and the willful blindness of American employers.
The true American border is no longer a physical line drawn in the sand, but a porous, invisible membrane woven from unlinked server farms, perfectly forged holographic plastic, and the silent daily compromises made in HR offices across the country, a meticulously maintained illusion of security built by a society entirely dependent on the exact people it legally claims to exclude.